However, I think that this process would benefit from pausing and actually getting the parameters right. There is no immediate urgency, and it might actually speed things up in the future if we can actually get the protocols right. So as I foreshadowed, I'm going to move an amendment to your recommendations that there be a working party established to look at. I was just going to say, Member Wilcox had indicated that he also supported this. So, and that we try and report back as quickly as possible.
Yeah. No, that's fine. These are not my recommendations, Councillor. These are the recommendations in the report. So I think there's never anything wrong with having a bit of a deep breath and a cup of tea, making sure that we're doing everything right. So we've just got to establish and get some clarity around the time frame, and just make sure that, you know, we're not up against something that could, you know, bring this all to a kind of a shattering halt. It doesn't seem to me like it will, if we've been talking about it for a year. So, you know, it may well be that this means that we end up with a better result. So just maybe a little bit of advice on timeline. So while everyone thinks about it, maybe we'll call Wayne up to the table to make a comment, and in the interim, Mayor Golf.
Yeah. Just a legal question, really. If we've already entered into agreement with Greenfleet that we will maintain the planting for 50 years, and in return they're expending time and money in that planting, doesn't that already have the force of a contract under law, and doesn't the encumbrance therefore simply formalise what contract law would already enforce?
Yes, I think I tried to touch on that earlier. The encumbrance does not increase the council's obligations with respect to the commercial arrangement that it would otherwise be in with Greenfleet, even without the encumbrance.
So that could lead us to the conclusion either that we shouldn't worry about the encumbrance, or that the encumbrance isn't really adding much more than what we've already got. So why are we having this long debate?
Exactly. Well, I guess firstly, obviously Greenfleet have expressed some concern that without something being noted on the title, the land could be dealt with to a third-party purchaser who would buy the land without notice of the arrangement with Greenfleet, and therefore would not be subject to it. That's their concern. We've expressed to them that we feel that that's a very small risk in the circumstances, but they have insisted that the encumbrance point be brought up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just wonder, Wayne, would you like to make a comment? Just to clarify that, because we seem to be coming at it from two edges. Number one, we're saying we think regional parks are safe enough, don't need the encumbrance. Greenfleet, as I understand it, saying we need the encumbrance because we want the 50 to 100 year time frame. Yep. Maybe it isn't.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Committee. I appreciate the time taken on this very much. And there's been a range of issues raised. Just a reminder, we're a not-for-profit, so we're on your side. This is the work we're trying to bring together, and I appreciate also the support from the previous chair over the last 12 months. A couple of things I think worth noting. Firstly, in fact, on Friday I had a long meeting with the Minister for Climate Change in Victoria, doing the same thing after my directors having signed an encumbrance on Parks Victoria land. We will now be able to invest over the coming years. We want to scale our work up with Parks Victoria, and we had similar discussions with them as well. We've also done a similar arrangement in Queensland at Bundaberg, where we're protecting a turtle hatchery on Crown land, and similarly we have an encumbrance on that title. So why do we do that? We work on both public and private land. We bring not government money, we bring thousands of individuals and hundreds of companies who support us, who offset their emissions with us. And it's all voluntary. Even though we have a financial services licence, we work in the regulated market, our focus here is on voluntary donations. And a critical thing for me is to be able to look my supporters in the eye and ensure that they know that the carbon that they are sequestering via us is going to be achieved. We won't have any greenwash, we won't have any half measures. We insist that that be done properly, and the only long-term way for that to occur is to ensure that, and I appreciate the discussion here today, is that there's an encumbrance on title, because what that means is if there is a transfer of ownership, And I even hear, notwithstanding laptops might be flying, that question may well be asked down the track. Who knows what happens in 10 years? And so it's very clear to me that an organisation like ours, which strives to protect most of the work we're planting, we strive to protect for 100 years. We're about building biodiversity across Australasia. That means we have to think much more beyond the current political cycles, and as you would appreciate in Australia, that's been a very difficult process for the last 10 years. So I'm quite clear that we need that long-term arrangement, and there's certainly no concerns with your council in terms of the ideology. I've worked with your council for many years in other roles. I have no concerns, but this fundamental issue of having an encumbrance recognises it, and I think now lawyers on both sides have managed to come to an agreement which meets the requirements of both parties. There's nothing sinister involved here. It's simply ensuring that in 20 or 30 years' time, if something occurs that has changed, then the supporters from this country, Europcar is a good example, and I'm talking to many others this week, can ensure that the supporters who gave money to Greenfleet, we then planted trees which over the next 50 years will sequester carbon to a clear carbon accounting regime, that will be we can ensure the integrity of that system. Without that, I can't really work with a voluntary process as I have at the moment. So that's really the core piece. So the context, I think Councillor Walker asked about context. As I say, we are doing this public and private land across Australasia, and that will continue. The opportunities to bring private sector money to build the common good for all of us. As an old environmentalist from way back, this is a great dream of ours. This is a good way of building partnerships for long-term sustainability, is to bring people together. We believe what we do really creates a sense of hope. And I think for us, the discussions with the council have been for some time. We've been through lots of legal discussions, and these things do take time, but I'm very keen, and the reason why I came here this week is, or one of the reasons, is I would really like to put this to bed so that we can move on and focus on how we can scale this program up. The question was asked before, where could this go? This could go to anywhere where we believe ecosystems can be restored, which is that's our mission. We want to restore ecosystems. We want to bring to areas which have had their ecosystems stripped out an opportunity for funding that we can deliver. So we'd like to do that in many other areas, and both private and public land. Does that make sense? So I'm happy to take any specific questions. If I've missed the ones, I've just jotted down here as we're going through it.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure there'll be a couple of questions if you're happy to answer them, Wayne. What I'm hearing is, and it's quite interesting, and I know Deputy Mayor Cashmore's the next speaker, but you're actually endeavouring to nail down some integrity to this process. Councillor
I have a question, Madam Chair. So you're taking statements as well?
I probably will take questions.
Yep.
So I just need to, I've got, I think Councillor Wayne Walker, question.
Sure.
And then we'll...
So I've got a question that's a bit specific to Auckland, but wider. We've got a major disease called carry dieback that may well decimate probably one of our major climax trees in the Auckland region. And there is no cure at this point. So in a circumstance where there's a deal with Greenfleet, there's an area planted out, but for one reason or another, the carry dies out, or cabbage tree disease, there appear to be any number of things that are coming on associated with climate change. What happens, and what's our obligation, what's Greenfleet's obligation around the replanting?
So we take on that responsibility totally, Councillor Walker. So our view is what we're trying to do is create resilient ecosystems, and that's Greenfleet's role. It typically takes 3 to 7 years to get that, and we will replant at our own cost. If there's some problem along the way in establishing that ecosystem, that's very important for us. You raised the issue of what happens locally. My organisation is focused on providing local investment around our region. in nurseries, contractors and so on who work locally. We would take advice, obviously, of Auckland Parks in terms of managing that. We plant what is local and native. That's our approach to our biodiversity approach. But at the same time, if there were those sorts of ongoing problems, we would be consulting with our local experts here. But the obligation is Greenfleet's.
So I just had a related question, and I think you've answered it. So essentially, the planting we're talking about is eco-source planting.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions before we get on to any statements? No? Deputy Mayor Cashmore?
Thanks, Madam Chair. So I don't see, Councillor, this is a really issue that has a lot of angst attached to it. We have public land which we have a management plan on for planting. This company is going to help fund that planting, and to protect that in the future, we're putting a 50-year covenant on it. Now, although that covenant is on private land, all it does is protecting our actual own asset management plan. So to me, it's not a big issue. You deal with these covenants in the private sector all the time to protect all sorts, whether it's a heritage space or an archaeological site or whatever. They're often used, Kiwi too. So they're commonplace, they're well understood, and this is trying to protect for 50 years what we're already protecting in our own management plan. So I don't see the issue.
Okay. Any other? We've got an amendment up here. I guess Councillor Fletcher and Member Wilcox, what I'm trying to understand, because we have had a pretty thorough discussion, from a legal point of view, and the answer is there isn't. I think Councillor Darby asked a good question. There isn't a planning alternative. This is the legal alternative. It's been explained to us what the proposal is, to hold some integrity into carbon sequestration, so that the people who are paying for this actually know that it's genuine and not just greenwash. It's been tried in other areas. I'm just struggling to see, apart from the point you make, Councillor Fletcher, which is that it hasn't been talked about with the wider community. I'm not too sure what else a working party would do. I'm not too sure what other information we need.
Madam Chair, if I may, when this was first mooted, and I was a great supporter of it, in fact pushed it quite hard through the Parks Committee, it was not suggested that there be any encumbrance on titles. So this was new information to me and probably to those members of the former Parks Committee of Council. It may be that this is the only way forward. Because it is precedent setting, I think there does need to be just a little bit more scrutiny. We need to look at other international evidence of those sorts of agreements, and whether there are alternatives that can be explored, and then to report back to this committee. I would rather get the parameters of it right now in order that we can make faster progress in the future. But if we don't do that, it's going to introduce a measure of distrust. And as you referred to in earlier agenda items, this committee, more than any other committee, is charged with actually bringing the public trust back to this council.
So hence my confusion about what more information. I think the issue of trust is we're actually going to do what we said we'd do, which is plant trees and keep them there for 50 years. I think the lack of trust is based on we're going to plant them and then we could just chop them down.
Madam Chair, I
that's what I'm
totally
struggling
accept
with.
what you are saying in terms of the importance of having something with integrity, but I would like to know whether there are any other options before, at a governance level, we give the sign-off for this today.
Okay. Alrighty. Councillor Filipaina.
Chair, I just wanted to sort of get it clear in my head too in regards, and I support what you've said, because I want to really find out what happens if this amendment goes through. And that's really the key question. I know it's been a year, but I mean, what happens? I mean, if we end up coming back February, March, April, I mean, really I just want to hear from yourself around, you know, what happens from your perspective, because You know, you're here, this is why you flew over here. We also, you know, the Councillor Fletcher mentioned, look, there may be some other alternatives. And I'm trying to get in my head, well, if that's the case, does that mean we rule you out of the equation? I don't know, but I'd be interested through your chair, if that's okay, just to sort of get a response around, you know, from, again, what, you know, just let us know.